Well, the War Powers Act establishes a 60-day deadline during which Congress must either authorize or end military action in Iran. That deadline, that 60 days, is today. But Donald Trump now says his war of choice with Iran has been terminated because of a ceasefire between Iran and the United States. In a letter to Republican leaders, Donald Trump wrote, quote, "There's been no exchange of fire between United States forces and Iran since April 7th of 2026. The hostilities that began on February 28th, 2026 have terminated," end quote. Now, let's just consider how ridiculous that statement is. That because the ceasefire is holding for now means that the war is over. A ceasefire simply means a pause in fighting. Termination implies the war is over. So that's the president's take for the moment. Yesterday, House Speaker Mike Johnson just blatantly denied that we're even in a war. What war? There's still a U.S. blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Blockades are under international law acts of war. Trump even contradicts himself in the next line of the letter that he sent to Congress when he says, quote, "The threat posed by Iran to the United States and our armed forces remains significant. Accordingly, the Department of War continues to update its force posture," end quote. Okay, so the war is terminated. The threat remains significant. The U.S. continues to update its force posture, but the war is over. Got it? Meanwhile, Axios reports that Donald Trump was briefed yesterday on other possible military options in Iran after he continues to refuse every proposal to actually end the war that Tehran sends his way. Two sources with knowledge told Axios, quote, "CENTCOM has prepared a plan for a short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran, likely including infrastructure targets, in the hopes of breaking the negotiating deadlock. Another plan is focused on taking over part of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it to commercial shipping. Such an operation could include ground forces. Another option is a special forces operation to secure Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium." The longer this war drags on, the more support Donald Trump loses, both from within the Republican Party and with the American people at large. In fact, a new Washington Post poll found that Trump's war in Iran is as unpopular among Americans as the Iraq War was during the year of peak violence in 2006, and the Vietnam War was in the early 1970s. 61% saying it was a mistake for Trump to use our military against Iran. 61% disapproval in 2 months. This is important. The 2-month thing's going to come up again in a minute, so it's important to understand this. It took years for the Iraq and Vietnam wars to become this unpopular. But 60 days in, key Republicans are getting impatient with Donald Trump. This week, Republican Senator Susan Collins voted with Democrats for the first time on a failed vote to end the war. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski threatened to force a vote to authorize the war in the coming weeks. Even Republican Senator Josh Hawley told the New York Times if Trump doesn't pull U.S. troops out or come up with a legal reason to keep them there, Congress would need to proactively pass legislation authorizing the war. Quote, "And I don't really want to do that because I don't want to open up further conflict," said Mr. Hawley. "I want to wind it down," end quote. So Iran has reportedly sent a new proposal to the United States to negotiate an end to the war. Two senior Iranian officials say to the New York Times, quote, "The new proposal removes a previous condition Iran had set that Mr. Trump must first lift the sea blockade against Iran for negotiators to meet face-to-face. The proposal also offers more flexibility on the sequencing of steps, with Iran willing to first open the Strait of Hormuz, followed by the U.S. announcing the blockade was ending. The proposal still calls for nuclear negotiations to be postponed for a second phase of talks after a permanent ceasefire was reached," end quote. Okay, so that's what the Iranians said. Here's how Trump responded.
They want to make a deal, but I'm not satisfied with it, so we'll see what happens. Iran wants to make a deal because they have no military left, essentially, and they want to make a deal, but I'm not satisfied.
Of course, he didn't specify exactly what he wasn't satisfied with. People familiar with the details tell the Wall Street Journal that Iran has indicated to mediators that it would be ready to sit down for talks in Pakistan by early next week if Washington is open to its new proposal. So that's Iran giving Donald Trump an off-ramp in this war that Donald Trump is stuck in that he won't call a war. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, Iran is betting that America will crack first and end its blockade of Iranian ports in order to calm global markets and bring down American gasoline prices. U.S. officials are betting that Iran will instead relent because of the deepening economic crisis. So yesterday, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, admitted to Congress that it could take months or even years to replenish the munitions stockpiles that are being depleted by Trump's war on Iran. Our first guest tonight, Democratic Congressman Eugene Vindman, questioned Pete Hegseth when he testified to the House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday about American lives lost in Trump's war.
On March 1st, 6 Army soldiers, including a constituent of mine, were killed by an Iranian drone strike. Do you take any responsibility for those deaths?
I was there at Dover when they came back. Of course, I take responsibility for every aspect of this mission.
Well, I appreciate that, because you also complained about the fact that tragic things happen. The news makes it front-page news. The press only wants to make the president look bad. Is it about the soldiers, or is it about the president looking bad?
It's not just the president who wants, or the media that wants to make him look bad. It's you.
It's actually about the soldiers, and it's frankly reprehensible that you would make that statement.
Joining us now is the Democratic Congressman Eugene Vindman of Virginia. He's a member of the Armed Services Committee. He's a retired Army colonel. I remember when Pete Hegseth was in the Pentagon briefing room and he said that he said, you know, why you guys always go for these headlines that make the president look bad? This was after soldiers were killed in a war that they won't call a war, that they won't ask Congress permission to fight, and they won't justify why it's happening or how it's going to end. I think the point you brought up was key. People have died. Innocent people have died, whether they are U.S. members of the U.S. military or civilians on the ground all across the region who had nothing to do with this war.
Absolutely. Look, the statement that the secretary made during that press conference was shameful. It was dishonorable. It was disgusting. And I gave him an opportunity to take it back. And he doubled down. I mean, for him, he's got an audience of one. He's got to please the president. And the cavalier attitude that he and the president have displayed to American casualties and the deaths in this war, and frankly, the 400 or so that have been wounded is unacceptable. That is, those lives are permanently injured. The families, I've met the families. I met the children that had lost parents, the parents that had lost children, and just unacceptable behavior.
So when one of your colleagues suggested that the U.S. might have got himself into a bit of a quagmire here, which happens, he thought that was insulting. Hegseth said it's 2 months in. To call this a quagmire is an insult to the troops who are fighting this war. But it's an insult to the troops to send them into wars without any valid justification.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a job to do. We represent constituencies. In my case, I represent 3 military installations, 72,000 veterans, nearly 20,000 active duty service members. And it is my job to ask the tough questions about how we ended up in a war without a plan, and what is our plan on getting out of this war. And the secretary, frankly, did not have a plan. And right now, this preposterous statement saying that the ceasefire is a termination of the conflict is just absolute nonsense. A ceasefire is just that, cease firing. It's a temporary pause to bombing, shooting, and fighting. The president and the secretary owe it to the American people and owe it to Congress to come with a plan on how we actually exit a conflict where the status quo before would be, frankly, a dream. You know, the Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices have skyrocketed. The American people are paying the price for this war.
So there's a lot of trickery going on because they really haven't called it a war. They've not gone to Congress to ask permission for this. Now Donald Trump says, he used the term, the war has been terminated because of the ceasefire. The idea here is not simply that Congress may not give Donald Trump permission to conduct this war. It might not. It's going to be close one way or the other. It's that the president seems to be making the point that I don't really have to get your approval to go to war.
Well, he's done that repeatedly. I mean, this is sort of the 8th conflict, twice now in Iran that we've been engaged in conflict. And the president has not sought congressional approval for any of these. And he's gotten basically a blank check, a rubber stamp from the Republican-led House of Representatives and the Senate. And he doesn't feel like he has a need, has an obligation to take this to the American people or Congress. And that is why this war is so unpopular. 2 months in, obviously the American people are paying higher gas prices and there's significant inflation. But I'll tell you, one of the reasons is the president never laid out the case of why we need to fight now in Iran. And that's showing in the approval.
And there are a lot of experts who are involved in this who say there was more space on the diplomatic front. There was more space on the sanctions front. There was a lot more to do. The idea of choosing war when you have other options is a difficult and complicated one, and it doesn't seem to make sense. And Pete Hegseth couldn't seem to make sense in his performance before Congress this week.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he struggled to make the case. He claimed repeatedly that, imagine Iran with a nuclear weapon. Well, guess what? Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
Correct.
Iran has not demonstrated a desire to get a nuclear weapon. In fact, there was a fatwa issued by the previous Ayatollah prohibiting a nuclear weapon. The assessments were that there is no nuclear weapon. Now, obviously, that would be an unacceptable outcome, but it is an absolute fabrication to claim that they were on the verge of a nuclear weapon, especially 8 or 9 months now, or I guess a little bit more, since we obliterated
it. Yes.
Last year. It's outrageous. It's nonsensical.
And they both make the point that a nuclear weapon on a missile that can hit America, also that they don't have. So at some point, whatever this is, we call it a war or not, it's built on a house of cards. Congressman, good to see you as always. Thank you, Congressman Eugene Vindman of Virginia.